Sure. So, I had been doing this work for a long time and, had reached a point in my career where I could help women reach orgasms. I could help, them overcome painful intercourse. I could help men, manage ED, and I could help a couple improve desire and satisfaction. But I would occasionally get people returning, usually for their accountability session, longing for more intensity and passion. It's like they didn't want to necessarily settle. Yeah, I adore Barry McCarthy, but he came up with the quote, good enough sex model. And they
Oh,
just didn't want to settle for that kind of good enough sex. And so I started paying closer attention to the language that they were using to describe the sex they wanted. Words like, I want the world around me to disappear. I want it to feel effortless. I want it to feel like it seems like it does in Hollywood. And initially, I was kind of quick to remind them that Hollywood is Hollywood, not realistic, that the honeymoon stage is not sustainable. But as I started paying closer attention to the language they were using to describe the sex they wanted, I kind of had a light bulb moment. And I was like, oh, they're describing a flow state. And I was like, well, that makes sense. Of course, it's what we would want to experience when we make love. And so I turned to, I was familiar with flow state. So for your listeners who haven't heard of it, it's a decades old term, as you mentioned, coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, an American Hungarian psychologist and one of the fathers of positive psychology. And he observed that when people are engaged in an activity in which they experience, complete and total absorption, rapt attention and focus, they experience things like a sense of effortlessness, or time seems to speed up or slow down. Think of, a surfer who's at one with the wave, that it's almost like a transcendental, transcendent state, if you will. Um, so I was familiar with flow. It's not something, though, that I had ever really heard about or read in conjunction to sex. So I turned to the literature, the academic literature, to see what I could find, and there was nothing out there. I found, one study that looked at a very small sample of BDSM practitioners, looking at it specifically a couple of components of flow, but it didn't really answer the research question I had, which was, you know, is what people experience when they have sex at that more optimal level, who score high on sexual satisfaction, are they in fact experiencing a flow state?